Good to go? All right, awesome. Let me just get this fixed. Okay, hope everybody had a good week. Welcome back to Proverbs. We're closing out the discourse on wisdom, and so technically starting a different portion of the Proverbs today. Once we get to chapter 10, we'll talk about that, what makes it a little different in just a moment, but again, we're like flying through. We've already been here for 6 weeks, which is hard to believe. My hair has grown so much, I haven't cut it once. So we finish, again, chapter 9 closes the discourse on wisdom, written from the perspective of a father giving instruction to his son. And then once we get to chapter 10, it becomes, I guess for lack of a better term, very repetitive in terms of the form. It's just a constant contrast between the righteous and the wicked. And even in the headings of my Bible. So again, these are just like man-made, but they're kind of helpful sometimes for context. Chapters 10 through 18 in my Bible has the exact same heading. I think that's the only time in my Bible I have that same sort of like the editors have the same thematic structuring around the book. So kind of unique. We'll talk about it when we get to it. And really for the purposes of the class, when we come to a new chapter in sections 10 through 18, we're probably just going to focus on 4 or 5 Proverbs. Instead of reading, during the week you'll read the whole thing, but we'll just maybe talk about 4 or 5 at a time. So that's what we're going to cover today. Begin with Proverbs 9. I think this is, this chapter contains our theme verse, but some of the best verses we get in all the book of Proverbs comes out of here. Let's begin in verse 1 of chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She's prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She's also set her table. She sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat of my food and drink of the wine that I've mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you, but reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. It's just that section of Proverbs. A lot of things we could talk about here. Again, the final words of a father to his son. There's been this constant contrast between Lady Wisdom and the strange or foreign or adulterous woman who's come up 4 or so times. We get mentioned here in verse 13 of the woman of folly, maybe one last time as just a final contrast with wisdom. But notice the action words, the verbs here. Wisdom prepares, she protects, she builds, she discerns, and she invites all to her table, the wise and the foolish alike. Why is that important? Well, because wisdom is for all. The foolish are invited to partake in the fruit of wisdom, but they won't understand it and they won't appreciate it. And in fact, later on here, it says, he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insult for himself. Why is that the case? Why is it foolish to correct a scoffer?
Well, if you're unwise, you don't want to accept criticism or any correction. And if you're wise, you realize there's a lot you still need to learn, and you welcome it. You welcome somebody giving you some better knowledge.
Yeah. I'm not asking for a show of hands or for you to point to a person in the room. But we all know of someone who, for lack of a better term, we'd say, they're a don't confuse me with the facts type of person. Like, they already have their mind made up. They don't want to hear what you have to say. Or in this case, if they're a scoffer or mocker, they're amused at things that are perverse or making light of matters that are serious. And so the father says to his son here, essentially, you're wasting your time if you're trying to correct the scoffer. Yes, sir.
It just reminds me, the scripture says, don't cast your pearls before the swine.
Yeah, don't cast your pearls towards the swine. What's that?
Very humbling to get rebuked.
Humbling to get rebuked.
Yeah.
It's dangerous to pray for humility or patience, right? Because God might humiliate us or cause us to have to be patient.
Don't wrestle with a pig because you'll both get muddy and the pig likes it.
Yeah. Heard that one before. That's really good. That's really good. Don't wrestle with the pig because you both get muddy and the pig likes it. Yeah.
I don't think that's scriptural.
Yeah. I don't know what proverb that is, but it makes sense. It sounds good. I think just reiterating the same point, scoffers, mockers, they don't appreciate correction. They can't properly accept correction. And notice the contrast, and this is actually a nice setup for the continual contrast we'll see from chapters 10 through 18. Verse 9, give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. What happens if you reprove a scoffer? He hates you. You reprove a wise man, and he will love or appreciate you. Why? Because if there's something that you have to offer that can add to his wisdom, his understanding, he should appreciate that, and he should cherish you for being willing to correct him. I think it's true of any, I've used golf before, an example of ball golf, like I'm terrible at it, but if I have a chance to learn from somebody who can actually fix my swing or, help me, if I want to be a good golfer, I should cherish that sort of constructive instruction instead of being one of these, I'm just going to figure it out on my own. There are plenty of people who develop all sorts of bad habits, and the game of golf no longer becomes fun for them because they've just tried to do it themselves. And notice here in verse 10, I wonder why, if anybody has any thoughts on this, why in verse 10 is this the cap of this teaching, the middle portion? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. I've come across this phrase a few times. What's the significance of the fear of the Lord? Yeah, Don?
I think it's kind of like what you were saying about learning, want to know about golf, that you're kind of wanting to learn from somebody else. And I think the same thing, we're learning because of God, of who He is, we're submitting to Him out of reverence to learn and as much as we can, glorify Him as much as we can. It's just turning ourselves completely over to Him, to His will, for our lives, realizing that we don't know it, we shouldn't know it. I mean, I'm terrible to go golfing with because I joke around more than I played seriously. Yeah. But I don't joke around with God's Word. That's a serious thing. It's something that we submit to for the betterment of our own lives and our future.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see this a few more times, but I'll just recall back in chapter 1 in verse 7. You don't have to turn there, but the end of that introduction, chapter 1 and verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And then here's the contrast. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. Let's continue reading out verses 11 through 18, and then we'll close chapter 9. For by me, by wisdom, your days will be multiplied and years of life will be added to you. If you're wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone shall bear it. The woman of folly is boisterous. She's naive. She knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house, on a seat by the high places of a city, calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks understanding, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten or consumed in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. This reminds us of the picture that the father paints for his son in chapter 7 of the woman who sort of preys on this innocent, naive young man. The differences between the woman of foolishness, right? She moves in the darkness. She's sort of crafty and quiet. Whereas the lady wisdom invites all. She moves in the light. There's nothing shifty or particularly nefarious or evil about how she moves. An encounter with God's holiness. This is just a reflection I had on verse 10, transitioning here. When you encounter the goodness and holiness of God, you really are just driven to awe. And that seems to be the disposition that Solomon, the Proverbs writer, wants us to have. That before we can ever have any real success, we must experience with awe the Lord and come to fear Him. It reminds me of this hymn. There's different, it's been like written out, translated different ways, but it's the hymn, God Himself is with us. Maybe you've heard that. God Himself is with us. Come, let us adore Him. There's a line in this song. God Himself is present. Heart be stilled before Him. Prostrate inwardly adore Him. And it's from that foundation that someone, for the Proverbs writer, can begin to become wise or knowledgeable or trustworthy. Notice your wisdom or your foolishness. That is a typo on my part. Good job making the PowerPoint. Your wisdom or foolishness seems to affect you alone in this passage. You see in verse 12, if you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone shall bear it. Maybe this is just another one of those instances that we don't want to read it isolated, but before we've seen that our foolishness has consequences for others, right? Or wisdom has positive outcomes that others can partake of. And notice again, as in the end of chapter 7, the dead are in the company of the foolish woman. You never would have followed the foolish woman had you known that it would lead to your destruction. And as it said at the end of chapter 7, the young man who followed the woman was like an ox being led to the slaughter. Notice it says, he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depth of Sheol. And that's the last words that the father says to his son. So any just reflections you have about this whole section of the wisdom discourse that we've read thus far, all the way from chapter 1 through the end of chapter 9. Anything big picture-wise stood out to you about these? Yes, sir.
The verse, chapter 9, verse 10 and 11, it reminds me of Moses beginning his journey when God told him, take out your sandals, this ground, you're standing on this holy ground. And then Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse number 7. So although Moses was 120 years old, when he died, his eyes was not dim, nor his vigor abated. So the reverence and obedience to God and understanding the wisdom and the mind of God, and although his ups and his downs, God took care of him. Like I said, he was 120 years old. He still had perfect vision, and God took care of him and God buried him. No one knows where he's buried to this day.
Yeah, good reflection. Yes, sir.
Well, it's interesting how they use the word fear of God as the beginning of wisdom instead of love or faith. Because understanding, the more we understand that word fear, which is what I had to do, I understand it's not like being terrified of God. It's just basically recognizing who God is. When we walk in a dark room, we fear because we don't know what's in there. But when we see God, if we recognize who he is, then it's like a light that, we see that this is what I need to get better understanding, to better love, to better clarify what reality is all about, what my future is all about, and how I could possibly benefit from all of this. And so when I look at it in that contrast, I see that I must have that understanding first before I can love God the way that he wants me to. And it's kind of like, this is what I need to teach my kids too. It's like the natural order of how your kids should learn to love you, because if they don't fear you, then they're not going to love you. If they don't respect you, because that's a part of that fear that they're talking about, having reverence, fear of God, then they're not going to learn to love you. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to understand that, in relationships, people have to respect you before they can grow and admire you or grow, and you have some kind of influence in their life. So it just kind of brings out a bigger clarity of understanding when you understand what fear is, what that word fear means in this particular context.
Yeah, that's good. Think about like living here at the beach. Some people have a fear of water in the sense that they don't even want to stick their feet in. But I think the people who get the most out of the experience at the beach are the people who enjoy being in the water, but they're also in awe of what is out there. What can water do, right? What could this ocean do if there's a massive storm here? They have a healthy respect or healthy appreciation for what a gift something like the beach could be, but also how terrifying it could be. Yeah, Tim.
We read these chapters, and I think, Chet, probably most of us identify with people. I listen to wisdom. I listen to I'm the wise guy who is taking advantage of all these things. Yes, and so often our actions don't bear that out. And if we're honest with ourselves, these are really powerful truths that are being shared here if we're humble enough to kind of see ourselves as needing to hear this information.
That's a really good point. We're always really good at making ourselves like the good guy of the story, or when people misunderstood Jesus or accused Jesus, we say, how foolish of them. I never would have done that, of course. But yeah, these are powerful lessons that are speaking to us if we're humble enough to admit that we need this wisdom. Tony?
I think oftentimes we confuse intelligence and influence with wisdom, especially, here on earth. We look to people who have that influence and who have a lot of intelligence, and so we gravitate towards those people. But the fact is, like, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So God is wisdom. And we can have all the intelligence in the world, we can have all the influence in the world, but if we don't fear the Lord, we don't have wisdom. And so I think of Solomon and the choices that he made. He didn't always have wisdom. And he had influence, he had power, he had everything in the world that you could want. But if we don't fear the Lord, we don't have wisdom. Wisdom and morality starts with God. And so I think to not have that grounding, that base, then we don't have wisdom. We will never have wisdom unless we have that.
Yeah, that's great. Mr. Darrell, did you have something? Oh, sorry.
This kind of, I guess, goes along with what Tim was saying, but in all the chapters overall, it's I get out of it that we have an option. We have options. We can take God's way, or we can take the highway, I guess you kind of put it that way. But the way we look at the attributes and the characteristics and all the other words I can't think of that describes God and, the wisdom and all that, if we take time, excuse me, to look at something and examine something, I don't think we'll end up like the last verse there where it's a surprise. Because when we go to the beach, I know what's out there in the water. I have a healthy respect for it. I have a lot of fun, but I don't want to be out there if there's a shark around there or there's tsunami coming and stuff like that. But it's a lot of fun. And I think life can be that exact same way if we're willing to open ourselves up to the wisdom that God is offering to us and examine that and not be so quick to jump and say, oh, I think I know everything and I'm going to do that, because the surprise is you may not know what's in the deep end of that water,
Sure. Good point.
Thank you. Chet, I've found out that through my studies, there are 4 important spiritual disciplines that involve us changing our lives and becoming closer to Christ. And I found those pretty much threaded all throughout the Bible, and they involve prayer, study, meditation, and there's 4 of them there. What did I say? Prayer, study, meditation. The 4th one I can't think of. But anyway, those disciplines are pretty much integral to our growing and being able to change and become closer to God. So if we're talking about, fear and wisdom and things like that, you have to be doing those things throughout your life in order to affect the change in your life so that you can see more and become more like Jesus. And if we're not practicing those things, because God's word has never changed throughout all time, but we seem to want to add things to it and try to accomplish something in a different way to get to the end, and it doesn't work that way when we're talking about becoming more and more like Christ. We have to, thank you, fasting. They were prayer.
He gave him the answer.
Yeah, he gave me the answer to the 4th one. It's fasting was the 4th one. So those 4 disciplines need to be practiced throughout our lives so that we can effect a change and thereby becoming more and more like Christ. And I think that way we can see things differently, because we got to realize that the things of this world are always going to dry up and they're never going to last. But Christ's word is eternal, and his gift he gave to us is eternal, which is eternal life.
Yes, sir. Great. Great thoughts there. I had just a couple of these key insights from this chapter I'd share with you. One, wisdom has all the qualities to make her attractive, but only a certain kind of person is going to want to pursue her. Again, that comes back to having the disposition that fears the Lord first. Nevertheless, she is a refuge for all who would seek her. I think the same is true of the gospel. The gospel is for all, is a message for all people, but not everyone's going to receive it. Not everyone will appreciate it or accept it. Some people will mock it, and that doesn't change the gospel. And it doesn't change the fact that the gospel is still for them. This was a great line I found at Bruce Walkey's commentary. He said, the mark of a foolish person, they neither know nor care about the consequences of their actions. Just like, I think about our daughter, when the first time we took her to the beach, she had no fear of the water and literally just ran head first, no wings, no float. We're setting the towels down and she's gone. She doesn't care about her actions. She doesn't know that horrible consequences could come had I not just been a little bit faster than her. But in a very similar way, that's kind of the picture of the person who follows the way of the foolish, the path of foolishness. They don't know or care about the consequences of their actions. So that brings us to the new section, what's often called the Proverbs of Solomon, because that's how it starts. Proverbs 10 and verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. And notice this is like a callback to the father-son discourse. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. And that format right there is going to be really repetitive for like the next 8 chapters. Ill-gotten gains do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger, but he will reject the craving of the wicked. You see, there's like a rhythm to how these verses come together. It's really difficult to outline this. I looked at a couple of different commentators who spend their life studying like Proverbs and Job and Ecclesiastes, and they say, we don't really know how to properly outline this section of Proverbs. They are more, you wouldn't really say random, but just aphoristic, short bits of wisdom that have been collated, collected together. And I think that makes these Proverbs maybe a bit more difficult to read in one sitting, to read like Proverbs 10, 11, and 12, and walk away and say, what's the most important information from that? If it's just a bunch of loose sayings, it might be difficult to find what the most important thing is. So, this is just me, like, what's been helpful for me is to try to plot out 4 or 5 Proverbs that I think have information that we're going to keep coming back to that seems thematically important. These chapters, again, speak to the outcome of the path that one has chosen. So whereas the discourse with the father, he's painted a picture. This is the wise woman. This is the wise path. This is the foolish, strange woman. This is the foolish path. Here, we're looking more at the outcomes of these pursuits. Look at a couple more of these just to sort of get the pattern set. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. That verse should automatically pull back to mind Proverbs chapter 6, the lesson of what is the ant supposed to teach us about the dangers of laziness. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise of heart will receive commands, but a babbling fool will be ruined. He who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out. He who winks his eyes causes trouble, but a babbling fool will be ruined. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence, and so forth and so on. Does anything I'm not fishing for an answer, but does anything stand out about the information, the teaching that we get in this series of verses?
Yeah, when I'm listening to what you're reading, and I heard you say, it's difficult to try to categorize these sayings of Solomon, but I think if we, I believe it's a proverb anyway, there is a way that seemeth right, but the end thereof is the way of death, or something like that.
Yeah, Proverbs 14, I think
yeah.
it's verse 10 or 12.
I think that's really sort of puts together what Solomon is trying to say. That there is a way that seems right, but if you look at these sayings that Solomon is saying, you have to really sort of focus on the right way to go, because there is a way that seems right, but the end thereof is the way of death.
Yeah, great. Once again, huge hand for Matt, our torchbearer, fastest man in the auditorium.
The first one that jumped out to me was verse 7 about the memory of the righteous, and I think of like names we choose for people. Like if you choose a name for a child that's a family name, that person you're naming that name comes from obviously had a big impact on you, or is very important, at least in your family. But also, the name of the wicked rotting. There's a reason you don't hear a lot of Adolfs or Jezebels being born these days, because it's just the name associated with wickedness is actually rots away. Like people aren't using those names anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. That particular verse kind of reminded me of what's said of Abel in Hebrews 11. I can't remember the verse off the top of my head, but he made a sacrifice. Yeah, verse 4, by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained a testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts. And through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. His memory is still alive. But that's not true of his brother, right? Yeah.
One thing that stands out to me is verse 9, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. Integrity is very important no matter what we do, trying to do the right thing and not walk in a way that's not right, especially in business, in the field I am in, just working with people and doing the right thing no matter what, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we mentioned a couple weeks ago that, the book of the Proverbs, it encourages us to be people who are trustworthy, and we generally want to be friends with people who are trustworthy. We don't really care how many degrees they have or how much money they have, but we like to surround ourselves with people who listen to us, who we can trust. And I think you're exactly right there. He who walks in integrity walks securely, but you said, your translation said, but he who, what did it say, who walks crookedly? Takes crooked paths. Yeah, I like that. That's good. I had a thought there, but it wasn't any good. Yeah. This was something if you read verse 3 let's read 3 through 5 again. The Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger, but he will reject the craving of the wicked. And then in verse 5, he who gathers in the summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. If you just took either one of those verses alone, like, you cut and crocheted them onto a pillow, I feel like you would miss something had you not read the other verse. So it says here that the Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger. And then in verse 5, notice he who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely. So it both says something about the Lord's providence, but also about the importance of someone acting wisely to prepare so that they don't go hungry. That's why I said it's important to, as best we can, try not to neglect these or isolate these proverbs. Because you could derive some harmful theology from just assuming that anyone who is well-fed has God's favor. And we could think about, again, we said, how would Job feel had Job read some of these proverbs? Just in isolation, because it wasn't the case at a certain point in his life. He had everything going for him. It really bothers me that the pointer points to everything but the screen. But that's a me problem. Need to get one of those long telescopic sticks. But you know it. There's maybe a couple more we could read through here. The rich man's wealth is his fortress. The ruin of the poor is their poverty. The wages of the righteous is life, and the income of the wicked is punishment. He is on a path of life who heeds instruction, but he who ignores reproof has already gone astray. He who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads slander is a fool. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. I mean, these are great. Like, when I think of the Proverbs, I think of these sorts of contrasting little nuggets of wisdom. I think for time, I want to move past that, because riches and poverty and foolishness this is going to come up a lot in just these sections of verses. But one thing you might want to think about, we're not going to talk about it now. How should we read the portrayal of the rich in the Proverbs in light of what Jesus will say about riches and wisdom in the New Testament? That's a big question for us to address later on. Notice he said, when there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. I can think of a lot of situations where saying something, I have painted myself into a corner, or, Rachel can attest to this. Plenty of times where me speaking, was not good for me. But I can think of very few times where I was silent and it was bad for me in a moment. It's easy to say the wrong thing to someone who's trying to grieve. We see that all the time. Like we walk up to in line at a funeral home, and you hear somebody say like, "Well, God just said it was His time to go," or something like that. That's really hard for that person to hear. And sometimes the best thing we can say at a funeral is just, "I'm here for you," and give someone a hug. I think that principle is something we'll pick up on a lot in these verses. Where there are many words, transgression is literally unavoidable. Sometimes it's best just to be quiet. Maybe I should take that and this class would be a lot shorter. You know what? Class is over. This has come up a few times already, but notice in verse 27, it says, "The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened." I think that goes back to what we already saw in chapter 9 and verse 11. "For by me, by wisdom, your days will be multiplied and years of life will be added to you." It could be something just as simple as our bodies are a temple of the Spirit of God. If we know it is good to eat well and exercise, and it's in our best interest to take care of ourselves as best we can, then we are wise to the best of our knowledge, take care of ourselves as best we can. That very simple cause and effect principle will add years to our life. For Proverbs 11, we're going to continue to read these, and I'll encourage you for next week, pick out maybe 4 or 5 Proverbs from the reading that we had that you found most insightful or you want to talk about, so that it's not just us reading a long list of contrasts. I wanted to pick out 5 Proverbs from Proverbs 11 for us to focus on here. The first is about wealth. Proverbs 11 verse 4, "Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." So although there's a correlation between heeding wisdom and being successful in gaining riches in the Proverbs, notice the Proverbs writer also says money's not the answer to everything. Wealth does not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from the day of wrath. So there will be some situations in which it doesn't matter how much money you have in the world. It's not going to deliver you. But what kind of character do you have? That will be important. Yes, sir.
There's an old saying, I think, that goes around, said, money can't buy you health. And that's the one thing I think that people seem to want more than anything else. If they could go back in time or anything like that, you get a bad report from the doctor, and no amount of money is going to, correct that.
Can't buy you health, can't buy you time. Yeah, Matt?
A lot of the Proverbs are great when you have made the connection to their New Testament teaching as a connection, really interesting to illuminate the meaning. So like this is a good example. This makes me think of, do not store treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, but build up for yourself treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. And it doesn't say righteousness in what Jesus said, but you can make the connection here and say, oh, well, that's a further explanation of what is that treasure in heaven.
Yeah.
And there's many examples like this. And when you can make those connections, you say, oh, this is the wisdom fingerprint of God. We can see it in the Old Testament, in these Proverbs, and also in the teachings of Jesus. It's all very connected.
You're right. And you wonder how many of the specific Proverbs would Jesus have had in mind when he taught certain things like that. Yes, ma'am.
I studied the Bible with a lady, maybe 6 months ago. So we studied everything, and at the end it was wealth. So I asked, what is it that you think God wants from you after we've studied the Bible? She says, my interest right now, Linda, is to stack up so when I get old, I have something to take care of me. So I said to her, what if you didn't have all this money? Then what? She says, well, right now, I'm not ready to give my life to God. Even though we went through everything, and she says she understands it, but her focus is on her money. So I said, you know, I showed her where it says, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? I said, you can't take it with you. There's a purpose why you've been blessed with it. And she still was like, I hear what you're saying, but right now, I'm not ready. So I told her, whenever you're ready, I'm here, but remember, money does not make you happy. It's for a purpose, but it don't bring happiness.
Yeah, great point. A lot of good comments today. This is the kind of stuff I'm looking for, because I don't like talking this much. You would think I do, but I don't. I just picked out 5 proverbs from here that I think thematically have been things we've already seen and will continue to see. A point that's already been made: a gossip goes about telling secrets, but one who is trustworthy in spirit keeps confidence. Right? You didn't hear it from me, but we all know how uncomfortable it is to be in situations like that, where you're hearing something that you don't know if it's true. You probably shouldn't accept it as true if someone's having to tell you in this sort of sly, secretive way. The merciful man does himself good, but the cruel man does himself harm. This is very interesting to me. Usually we extend mercy to other persons, but in this case, by showing mercy to someone else, you're doing yourself good. But by failing to be merciful, by being cruel, you are being harmful to yourself. The generous man will be prosperous, but he who waters will himself be watered. In giving you receive, right? I'm not sure that that's a biblical verse, but the principle itself is biblical. That when we give, we receive. God loves cheerful givers. Why? Because God is generosity. And the spirit of generosity that God has poured out on all creation, God hopes that we would emulate and we would model that. And then finally, righteousness. Righteousness or justice. This is the same word in the New Testament, same word in the Old Testament. You hear a lot of talk today about justice, as should be, but we don't think about justice and righteousness along the same lines. The biblical writers did think about justice and righteousness in the same way. If the righteous or the just will be rewarded in the earth, how much more will the wicked and the sinner? So another contrast between the rewards of righteousness or justice in this life and the consequences that follow wickedness and sin. We have 1 minute to spare, which means I guess we're done. So thank you for your kind attention and your really good comments. For next week, I figured we would read through Proverbs 12 through 14, and then just choose maybe a couple of these to commit to memory. But I would encourage you maybe to get the most out of this section so you're not lost. Maybe when you come to a proverb in here that seems really profound to you, or something that harkens back to something else, make a note of it and try to have like 4 or 5 anchor points in these proverbs that we can talk about. Thanks for being here. Buzzer beater.